The global atmosphere has changed. Across continents, nations are rearming. Military budgets are increasing. Strategic alliances are tightening. From Eastern Europe to the Middle East, from the South China Sea to the Persian Gulf, multiple crises are unfolding at once. The fear is not about one single war. It is about convergence. History shows that world wars do not begin with one dramatic moment. They build gradually, through miscalculations, alliance entanglements, and escalating retaliation. Today, many observers sense similar patterns forming. But is that perception accurate? Or is this a cycle of regional instability within a still functioning international system? To answer that, we must examine the structure of global power. After the Cold War ended in 1991, the world briefly entered what analysts called a unipolar moment. The United States stood as the dominant global superpower militarily, economically, and diplomatically. However, that era is fading. China has risen economically and technologically. Russia has reasserted military influence. Regional powers like Iran, Turkey, and India have expanded strategic ambitions. The global system is now multipolar. Multipolar systems are historically more unstable than bipolar ones. In bipolar systems, like during the U.S.Soviet Cold War, two dominant powers manage escalation carefully. In multipolar systems, multiple actors test boundaries simultaneously. That is the environment we are living in today. World War I began with a regional crisis in the Balkans. World War II began with incremental territorial aggression. Neither began as a declared global war. So the fear is understandable. But there is a critical difference between then and now. Nuclear deterrence. Major powers today understand that direct war between nuclear states could mean mutual destruction. This creates restraint even during extreme tension. The real question is not whether tension exists. It does. The real question is whether those tensions can escape regional containment and trigger direct superpower confrontation. To explore that, we must examine the most volatile region right now: the Middle East. The hostility between the United States and Iran has shaped Middle Eastern geopolitics for decades. Since the 1979 Iranian Revolution, diplomatic relations have been severed. The U.S. views Iran as a sponsor of regional militias, a destabilizing force, a potential nuclear threat. Iran views the U.S. as an external interferer, a supporter of hostile regional governments, an architect of economic sanctions. This is not a new conflict, but it has intensified in recent years. Airstrikes, proxy attacks, cyber operations, and maritime confrontations have increased. Yet despite high tension, both sides have historically avoided full-scale direct war. That restraint matters. The conflict in the Gaza Strip has amplified regional instability. Israel's war against Hamas has triggered rocket exchanges across borders, militia activity in Lebanon, Iranian-linked group involvement in Iraq and Yemen, naval tension in the Red Sea. The danger is not Gaza alone. It is chain reaction. If Iran becomes directly engaged with Israel, and the United States intervenes openly, the conflict could widen significantly. However, so far, escalation has remained controlled. Contained, but volatile. The Middle East controls critical global energy routes. The Strait of Hormuz and the Red Sea are vital shipping lanes. Any disruption affects global oil prices, supply chains, inflation, food markets. This economic interdependence creates global anxiety. But it also creates incentive for de-escalation. Major powers understand that a regional war disrupting energy supply would damage everyone. Economic deterrence works alongside military deterrence. So far, this balance has prevented full collapse into broader war. But the Middle East is only one theater. The next layer involves the great power rivalry between Russia and the West. The war in Ukraine fundamentally reshaped global security dynamics. When Russia launched its full-scale invasion in 2022, it was not only a regional conflict. It was a direct challenge to the Western-led security order in Europe. NATO expanded military deployments. The United States increased weapons support. Sanctions targeted Russia's banking, energy, and defense sectors. From Moscow's perspective, NATO expansion toward its borders represented a long-term security threat. From NATO's perspective, Russia's invasion violated international law and European sovereignty. This conflict is critical because it involves a nuclear power directly confronting a Western-backed state. Yet despite intense fighting, there has been one consistent boundary. NATO and Russia have avoided direct battlefield confrontation. That restraint is deliberate. Both sides understand that direct NATO or Russia combat could escalate rapidly beyond control. So the war remains geographically contained to Ukraine even though its consequences are global. Modern conflict is no longer limited to tanks and aircraft. Russia and Western states engage in cyber operations, information warfare, sanctions and economic pressure, intelligence operations, strategic energy leverage. This is sometimes described as hybrid warfare. It allows confrontation below the threshold of open war. However, hybrid warfare carries its own risks. A cyber attack on critical infrastructure could be misinterpreted as a strategic attack. An accidental strike across borders could trigger alliance obligations. The risk today is less about intentional global war and more about miscalculation. History shows that wars often begin not because leaders want total destruction, but because events spiral faster than diplomacy can manage. Russia possesses one of the largest nuclear arsenals in the world. The United States maintains a comparable nuclear capability. This balance creates deterrence. The doctrine of mutually assured destruction means that any direct large-scale war between these powers would be catastrophic for both. During the Cold War, similar tension existed for decades, yet global war never occurred. Why? Because nuclear weapons paradoxically enforce caution. However, deterrence only works if all actors behave rationally and communication channels remain open. If internal instability, leadership miscalculation, or battlefield escalation breaks that logic, risk increases. At this moment, nuclear powers are signaling strength, but also signaling limits. The confrontation is intense, but structured. Now we turn to another rising superpower whose decisions may define the coming decades. China. Over the past 4 decades, China has undergone one of the fastest economic expansions in modern history. It is now the world's second-largest economy, a technological competitor to the United States, a rapidly modernizing military power. But China's strategy differs from Russia's. Where Russia often acts through direct military confrontation, China tends to use long-term structural influence, trade dominance, infrastructure investment, supply chain control, strategic technology development. Beijing's leadership views the 21st century as an era of multipolar transition, one in which American dominance gradually declines and Asian influence expands. The key flashpoint in this transition is Taiwan. China considers Taiwan a breakaway province that must eventually reunify with the mainland. The United States follows a policy known as strategic ambiguity. It does not formally recognize Taiwan as independent but supplies it with defensive weapons. This delicate balance has prevented war for decades. However, tensions have increased due to Chinese military exercises near Taiwan, U.S. naval patrols in the Taiwan Strait, political rhetoric about sovereignty and deterrence. Why is Taiwan so important? Because beyond politics, Taiwan is central to the global semiconductor industry. A conflict there would disrupt global technology supply chains, from smartphones to military systems. Unlike regional wars, a Taiwan conflict would immediately have worldwide economic consequences. That is why many analysts consider it one of the most dangerous potential triggers for superpower war. Despite military pressure displays, China has shown strategic patience. Beijing understands that direct war with the United States would damage its economy, disrupt global trade, risk international isolation. China's approach has been incremental. Expand naval capacity. Increase regional influence. Strengthen economic partnerships. Wait for favorable geopolitical conditions. This suggests that while tension is real, immediate war is not inevitable. China calculates risk carefully. Like Russia and the United States, it operates under nuclear deterrence logic. So we now arrive at the central question. With crises in the Middle East, war in Eastern Europe, tension in East Asia, are these separate conflicts? Or the early stages of something larger? World wars rarely begin with formal declarations. They begin with escalation chains. Scenario 1. A regional conflict pulls alliance systems into direct combat. For example, if a NATO member were directly attacked by Russia, Article 5 could trigger collective military response. Scenario 2. A Taiwan crisis escalates into direct U.S.-China naval engagement. If casualties mount rapidly, political pressure could force broader mobilization. Scenario 3. A Middle East war expands beyond containment. If Iran and Israel enter direct sustained warfare and U.S. forces engage heavily, other powers could align diplomatically or militarily. But notice something important. Each scenario requires crossing a threshold that major powers currently appear determined to avoid. Escalation is possible, but not automatic. Despite high tension, there are stabilizing forces in the system. First, nuclear deterrence. No major power can assume victory in a full-scale war. Second, economic interdependence. China and the United States are economically intertwined. Europe depends on global trade stability. Energy markets link the Middle East to Asia and the West. Third, diplomatic backchannels. Even during severe crises, communication lines remain open between major militaries. History shows that great powers often posture aggressively while quietly negotiating limits. The world today is tense, but not yet mobilized for total war. There are no mass global troop deployments across alliance systems. No universal wartime economies. No formal declarations between superpowers. This matters. The greater likelihood may not be a single catastrophic world war. It may be prolonged instability. A world of regional wars, proxy conflicts, economic competition, cyber confrontation, strategic rivalry. In other words, a sustained era of geopolitical tension. This resembles a new Cold War structure, but more complex and multipolar. The 21st century may not be defined by one explosive global conflict. It may be defined by constant friction between powerful states trying to reshape the international order. So, is World War III possible? Yes, structurally possible. Is it inevitable? No. At this moment, deterrence, economic interdependence, and rational calculation still outweigh escalation. The world is under pressure. Superpowers are in motion. But motion does not automatically mean collision. The future depends on decisions, political, military, economic, made day by day. And in geopolitics, restraint can be just as powerful as force.
Subscribe Info Beyond Borders now for more mind-blowing knowledge.